We take you from there to Fairfax County, where Police Chief Kevin Davis now addressing reporters surrounding an officer-involved shooting in Annandale. Let's take a live look in.
Sure. Yeah. Yep. So, Bob, when you give me the thumbs up with Paul's concurrence, I'll go. Okay, just before... okay, hold on a second. Just before 10 a.m. this morning, a 911 call came in to Fairfax County. A woman described a fight, an altercation she was having with her husband. She described her husband as threatening and, in fact, engaging in self-harm. She described her husband as stabbing himself inside their residence with a knife. She also described that the husband had threatened to harm her. Our police officers responded to the scene, and as they were responding to the scene, they encountered both the husband, our suspect, running from the scene, and the wife pointing out to our responding patrol officers that yes, is in fact my husband running from the scene. So our police officers searched actually for about 15 good minutes before they located the suspect. He was in a wooded area. We took our time. We got a canine to respond to the scene to establish a perimeter. We suspected he went into a wood line, so we didn't want to run after him necessarily, but we wanted to surround the area where we thought he ran into. So we got enough police officers there to form a perimeter, got canine there to help us engage in the search for this man who we believed was armed with 2 knives. And I'll get back to those 2 knives in a minute. When canine arrived to the scene and we were prepared to search the wooded area for this man, our suspect, 2 canine officers, 1 canine dog, and a patrol officer entered the wood line, and they were searching for this man in a pretty thick wooded area that includes a little creek of sorts. As one of our officers, he's actually a second lieutenant, a 13-year veteran, was on the higher end of that wooded area, walking along looking for our suspect. The suspect abruptly emerged from a bush where he had secreted himself, and with his right hand grabbed, a full-on grabbed, the firearm that the police officer had at his side. And when I say grabbed, and I've seen this body camera footage in the past half an hour, at least 50 times I looked at it, our suspect takes his right hand, he grabs the firearm that the police officer had in his hand, and the top of the suspect's hand was around the top barrel of that firearm, and the bottom of his hand was wrapped around the frame of that firearm. The officer, obviously startled, discharged his firearm 3 times. We know it was 3 times. One of those 3 rounds struck our suspect. It was what I'll describe and what the hospital describes as a graze wound. There was no entry wound for the bullet, but it grazed what I believe is his upper right shoulder. At the same time, another police officer who was searching for our suspect discharged his taser. So if you can imagine, 3 police officers are in the woods. They're looking for a suspect. Our suspect emerges from a bush. He's laying down on the ground behind a bush. He grabs the firearm. It was a spontaneous discharge of not only a firearm that I just described, but another Fairfax County police officer spontaneously discharged his taser. Both the officers communicated with each other, and again, I can clearly see and hear it on body-worn camera that one was armed with lethal force, the firearm, and the other one was intentionally armed with less than lethal force, the taser. So our suspect was taken into custody. He's being treated. He received stitches, sutures at a local hospital for his non-life-threatening injuries. None of our police officers were injured. If I can back up to the initial 911 caller and her description of 2 knives being involved in this altercation, this act of self-harm that we believe our suspect was engaged in, there are about 30 cameras in this immediate vicinity who have registered with our real-time crime center in a program that we call Connect Fairfax County. So our real-time crime center has access to about 30 cameras live in this community, all in public spaces, all in outdoor spaces. And our real-time crime center was able to find our suspect while he was still fleeing from police. And they watch him take the 2 knives that he was armed with and discard those 2 knives. So we have since recovered those 2 knives. And what did he do with those 2 knives? He harmed himself with those 2 knives. He cut himself several times in his leg, thigh area, and we believe he threatened his wife with those knives as well. So that's a lot to spill. I'm sure you got some questions. I could fill in any gaps. I certainly will. Bob?
What kind of criminal history does this person have? Is he known to you guys? Do you know anything about the person who was shot?
So I'll say this, Bob, and I'm usually pretty careful about not talking about criminal histories. Our suspect in this case, and I think it's important for the community to know, has a significant domestic violence past and relationship with the wife, our 911 caller. So yes, I'm not going to go into criminal histories, but he's known to the criminal justice system, and the residents is as well. And I say that not to cast aspersions. I just say it to paint a context that I think our community looks for in scenarios like this one. And it's a logical first question. Is the address known to the police? Is the relationship known to the police? Because that all matters, particularly when we use force like this to make an apprehension. Paul?
You have 3 body cameras that are working at the scene when he grabs the gun at the point?
So I have watched 2 body cameras that capture the interaction where our suspect grabs the gun. The 3rd body camera, the 3rd officer, his body camera was on, but he was down the slope, kind of in a ravine area, and his body camera doesn't capture it. But 2 of our 3 body cameras capture the entire interaction. I've seen each one, and again, I've watched it multiple times over the last half an hour or so. So the beauty of body cameras is it informs not only law enforcement leadership about what happened, but it puts me in a position to share that information and those facts with the community.
So they went into the Woodland, one had his pistol out and one had his taser out at the time?
Yes, consistent with any search for a person who may be armed, Paul, not just here in Fairfax County, but elsewhere. One officer will have a deadly force option immediately available to him, and in this case, it was our discharging officer who had his firearm out. The other officer who had his taser, they made a plan, and they verbalized the plan, and I got to see it and listen to it, that one was going to be the less than lethal option if necessary, and the other one was going to be the lethal option if necessary. So that training, those expectations were met, and I was glad to see them have a plan.
Chief, when they went into
One more.
Yeah, going into this, you said that the officers thought the suspect might be armed. At what point did you guys see the video that he tossed the knives already?
That's a great question. We didn't see that until afterwards. So our access, thanks to Connect Fairfax County, which is a great program we have here in Fairfax County for folks to share cameras with us, we accessed that camera footage afterwards. Again, it's 30 plus cameras in the vicinity. We were very interested in recovering those knives for evidentiary purposes, because not only were those knives something that he initially fled with in his hand or on his person, but those were the knives that he used to stab himself and threaten his wife with back at the home.
So, Chief, when they went into the woods, they didn't know if he still had the knives or not, even though the cameras had seen that he dropped.
Right. Now, the cameras were after the fact. But I think it's important to mention, for the purpose of our dedication to have visibility in public spaces where there could be crime and chaos. But when the officers entered the wooded area, again, it's a canine dog and his handler. It's another canine officer without a dog, and it's a patrol officer. So it's 3 police officers entering the woods. Again, we had been looking for him for about 15 minutes. So this was not a spontaneous foot pursuit. This was slow. It was methodical. There were woods available. We suspected he ran into the woods. The last thing we wanted to do was run in there blindly after him. So that's why the supervision, the other assets, to include canine, obviously, were on the scene to help us do that safely.
How badly did he injure himself before the incident?
So I saw the wounds, the self-inflicted wounds that, again, his wife described that he committed, that he did to himself. And I would say that they are superficial to minor puncture wounds. If you can imagine someone who was contemplating harming himself with a knife, and he, again, it seems to me he was probably poking himself in the thighs with his knife in the presence of his wife. And again, he threatened her with those very same knives, which prompted her to make a 911 call.
Will you release the photographs of the knives?
Absolutely. So, again, we have a commitment, a self-imposed commitment to our community that we're going to release all body camera footage within 30 days. But the still shot of the knives, but more particularly, and we'll probably do this sooner rather than later, there is a still shot of our suspect reaching from the bush where he was about as high as this microphone stand that he emerged out of, and his arm comes out of that bush and it grabs, again, wraps around. If you think about the size of a semi-automatic pistol, the top of his hand is wrapped around the barrel of that pistol, and the bottom of it is around the frame of the gun. It took the officer 2 hands to pull his firearm back from our suspect. Thankfully, our officer never relinquished possession of the firearm to the suspect. He exhibited great gun retention skills. Again, we trained to that. But thankfully, he still maintained possession of his own gun. But again, it took him 2 hands to pull that gun back.
And you'll have that image in the next hour for us.
That's a good one, Bob. We're going to have that as soon as possible.
We saw officers photographing a car up at the front of the complex. Does that have anything to do with this scene? And
A car in front of is it a police car? Or?
there was a red car detectives were photographing.
I don't know, but I think if we do know, we can say. I'm not sure exactly what we're photographing. I imagine, we're going to look at the residence where the initial incident occurred, and we're going to look at the likely path that he traveled before he was taken into custody, and we're going to want to photograph and capture any bit of evidence that might be available. But we'll find out.
And is he facing any charges?
Absolutely. He's going to face several charges, a felony assault against a police officer, an attempt to disarm a police officer of his or her firearm is also a crime. And we're going to look into see what, if any, crimes he committed at the home with his wife.
And we recently saw a case where a man was accused of multiple domestic violence incidents, and he went back and he harmed individuals in the home. I remember what month that was, but it was in Fairfax County. What are we going to do to protect this family moving forward?
So we're one of the only police departments in the country that has a full-time victim services division. These are professional personnel who do nothing but interact with crime victims. And as you can imagine, domestic violence crime victims are at the top of the pecking order. So we routinely relocate victims. We relocate witnesses as necessary. We get people the help they need, the resources they need, temporary housing that they need. There's nothing that we won't do to protect our victims. Ultimately, one of the challenges with domestic violence cases is sometimes our victims are scared and they're intimidated and they're threatened, and they will recant.
Yet again, you have been watching Fairfax County Police Chief Kevin Davis discuss an officer-involved shooting in Annandale, recapping exactly what the chief stated. Apparently, they received a 911 call shortly after 10 a.m. this morning of a woman describing a fight with her husband. According to that woman, her husband engaged in self-harm, stabbing himself several times and threatened to stab her as well. When police arrived, the suspect made a beeline for a wooded area, and he was armed with 2 knives. According to Police Chief Davis, while in that wooded area, the suspect attempted to grab and did grab an officer's firearm. At that point, one of the officers shot 3 times with at least 1 bullet grazing the suspect in the right shoulder, another officer discharging a taser. That suspect has since been apprehended.